Hi, everybody. Yeah, have a lovely afternoon to wherever you are tuning in from. A while ago, I came across this research from the European Commission. And when I saw this, I was like, wow. For me, as someone who has worked in design for many, many years, and also for me who identifies as a designer, when I read this, that up to 80% of the future emissions are designated or posited in the design process, I felt two things. On one hand, I felt a bit scared and I felt the pressure because there's so much responsibility when you think about this. On the other hand, I also felt the opportunity to maybe tackle the problem at its root, and not only once we have built all these projects already. Now, normally, I'm not in big auditoriums, which are empty at the moment due to a reason we all know, but I split my work life between pursuing a PhD at the University of St. Gallen in Switzerland and also working at Goodpatch, as Evelina just said. And I was very, very happy when I was invited by the Gdynia Design Days to hold a lecture on a topic that is very, very dear to my heart. I want to talk today about planet-centric design. And throughout the next 45 minutes, I want to find an answer for this question that we have here. Is planet-centric design the solution? Now, in order to find out if it is the solution, we need to first understand a bit better the problem. And for that, we're going to start with thinking about human-centered design to start. And I will go a bit into the side effects of human-centered design that did not really, or were not really anticipated. Once we've done that, I will talk more about planet-centric design, what it is, what the current definition could be, and we're also going to go into some movements of planet-centric design to understand it even better. And in these movements, I want to share examples. I want to give some methodologies, how we can actually work within planet-centric design. And most importantly, I want to also raise some questions. Now, even though this is supposed to be a lecture, I don't think we can really lecture such big topics as planet-centric design. So I really hope this to be a start of a conversation. And the start of a conversation that we can all have together, ideally starting today and lasting long into the future. So yeah, I would say let's dive right in. What do you see when you look at this picture? One could start with saying, well, most of the things you see in here are designed. From the train car that the people are sitting in, to the electricity plant that provided the electricity that gets this car moving, to the nice designer luggage we see, to the advertisements in the back, all the way to the nice suits that the people are wearing. Another thing that we see is that a lot of people are also staring in something they're holding in their hands. To be more exact, the smartphones. I have one with me as well, and I'm sure most of you have one of these things. And it makes sense. These are really great products. Some of the most influential products that have been invented. I mean, my job wouldn't be really here if it were not for this little thing. But it's not just the smartphone itself that is quite genius. It's also all the apps and services that we can access through this device. We can see what the weather is going to be like. We can check if the stars are in line to make important decisions. We can shop. We can navigate. So I had some, not trouble, but I really had to figure my way to get here as well. And so these are all really great things. But as you see, it's literally everybody staring into these things. And we also see a couple of downsides. So maybe we spend a bit less time with our loved ones, with the people we really care about because we're with that device. Maybe we buy one thing and then we buy another thing because it was recommended. We didn't really need it, but it just fits so well together with the other one. And maybe we don't feel so nice about ourselves anymore because we've seen how well everybody else is doing. And now we've been looking at this picture for quite a while, and some of you might say, well, Sam, it's not so bad. One person is actually reading a book or a newspaper. And I thought so as well, but if we zoom in, you actually see that person is also just holding a paper in front of their smartphone again. Yeah, what makes all of these products and services so addictive almost? One of the reasons is that we have gotten really, really good at human-centered design. I'm a big advocate of human-centered design. I've been doing it for years. And I think it really has changed a lot of organizations for the better. It really has pushed them to really think about what value they are creating and what they're really doing this for. But at the same time, whenever we get really good at something, there is a chance for something that I call a hyper-efficiency, I would call it. We start optimizing this one thing. We start really only focusing on that one, and that's when we suddenly have the side effects. And that's the tricky part here. Because if we constantly keep optimizing for the human, for our needs, for my needs, and there's a funny side note. I mean, quite often we optimize for people like me, about my size, male, and that is not such a big issue when you have, I don't know, some insurance product, but it can decide between life and death when we talk about car design or medicine. But that's a completely other topic. Let's focus back on this. What I'm saying is, if we constantly optimize this system we call life for this one element called the human, we will eventually end up with the system failing. It's a bit like a bodybuilder who only works out the upper part or the biceps, and you will eventually fall over. It's not good for your body, right? Our body is a system too, and we need to take care. We need to exercise the whole body in order to be truly healthy. And what's happening, these side effects that are happening are often referred to as dark patterns. Now, I'm sure some of you might have heard of dark patterns, especially when you're working in design. But I'm absolutely certain that all of you have experienced dark patterns. Let's start with myself. So on my way to Gdynia, like 4 weeks ago, when I was looking into where I might spend the night, I've never been here, so I was searching online, I was on the platforms. I tried to find a hotel. And then I got to a hotel and it would tell me, your room has just been booked by another person. There's only two rooms remaining, so hurry up. Book really fast. So I booked a room, I was fine. I was actually happy to know that, lots of people really want to stay at that place that I'm staying. But what you observe here is also a dark pattern. By kind of providing me some value, at the same time, it really pushes me into a certain behavior where conversion happens much faster. And I checked 2 days ago again if this room was still available, and we still had 2 rooms available in the hotel I'm staying at right now. So that's one dark pattern. Another dark pattern, as example, would be maybe you remember Clubhouse. Clubhouse was very, very big at the start of the year as this audio-driven social network. And what Clubhouse used to do was to really just take all the phone numbers in your contacts and share it with, upload it to their own platform and share it with the ones that have your phone number as well. And that really helps because I, as a user, I'm on that platform and I go like, oh, I have also so many friends, so many people I know, and that person I haven't seen in such a long time. But on the other hand, it's also a dark pattern to make me commit to upload all these things without me really wanting it in the first place. There's other examples. This, everybody of you knows. We have it in different social media applications like Instagram, like Facebook, for example. And it's called infinite scroll. It's this constant stream of amazing content that we can see. And it's really, really addictive because whenever we see something nice, another nice thing, we get a rush of dopamine to our head. And that's why Instagram, for example, has also been called the slot machine of the millennials. Because whenever you pull down, you get another shot of adrenaline. Well, not adrenaline, but dopamine. And it's not just the millennials. I mean, look at the newest kid on the block, which would be TikTok. I try out all these things all the time because I don't want to get old, and just try out all these new platforms. And oh my God, I really had to set myself a timer as well because the algorithm is so good. I could see so many TikToks, people singing on top of each other's recordings, making huge gospel choirs. It was pretty amazing. But on the other hand, it really sucked me in. It got me almost in an addictive behavior as well. Yeah. Now I walked the streets a bit in Gdynia yesterday and today, and I saw all these exhibitions that belong to the Design Days. And it was quite fascinating to also see lots of product design. So I also want to give some examples within product design, where we see dark patterns. At the hotel yesterday morning, when I wanted to make some tea, I saw one of these tea kettles. And a tea kettle is another example of a product that kind of has an unsustainable behavior built in. I don't know how many of you own such a tea kettle. But if you do own one, I'm pretty sure you fill it usually much more than you really need it. So you see the cup next to it, it's quite a bit smaller, right? So usually, I would say we use maybe half the water that we boil up. So this means with every time we boil tea, we waste the electricity for the other half. And the teapot is not helping us to get better at this. It's not indicating how much you need for a cup. It's also not even able, I think, to boil water for less than 3 cups. So it really has a built-in, almost a waste mechanism for electricity. And now take a country like England with lots of tea drinkers, sum that up, and you have yourself a problem. So that's an example for product. Let's move on to service design. You should know this already, even though it doesn't say the whole name, but let's, for example, take IKEA. Many of you have been there, and I think most of you have forgotten how bad the checkout experience actually is when you're at the cashier. I mean, imagine you have your cart, you have this huge furniture piece in there, you kind of try to navigate, and you try to not drive anyone over. Then you get this beeper thingy, you beep everything, you put it on the belt, and so on. It's a huge mess. And then you finally see the price, and it's twice as high as you expected, so you're really pissed. And you're like, oh, I hate IKEA, I'm never coming back. But then you pay, you go like, all right. And then you see it over there, you see hot dogs for almost no money. And that really is one way also how service design and very good human-centered design makes us forget the bad experience. So it actually helps us in the end. But by showing this option to get really cheap hot dogs, all I remember after I've been to IKEA is that I had a hot dog, which was very cheap. And here we see another issue again, right? So IKEA, I'm pretty sure, is the world's biggest hot dog vendor. I read that they sell 100 million hot dogs a year. Now let's say a quarter of these hot dogs people only ate because they're cheap and they were basically thrown into their way. This still makes 250 million hot dogs that were not needed, that people just eat. And unfortunately, most of these hot dogs also contain meat, and meat has so many other externalities. So we have the soil, we have the water, we have the animals, all these things that come together. So this is all these small little things where we have to think, are we just optimizing for the shopping experience, or are we optimizing for maybe something bigger? And kudos to IKEA. I think they've realized that this was an issue. They are rolling out a vegan alternative. I want to challenge them. What if you just get rid of the meat version altogether and just have vegan hot dogs as the standard choice? That I think would be a very bold move. But with this example, I just want to show it's really a question, who do we want to provide value for, and who's part of our understanding and our value? Now, all these examples have one thing in common. What we see is that all the things we design, it doesn't only matter how we build them, what materials we use, because we can use more sustainable materials. But the really big thing that happens is that these things, these artifacts, have agency. What does that mean? If artifacts have agency, they have a direct effect on our behaviors, how we behave, how we consume, how we interact. And therefore, with design, we really change human behavior. Now, all of this might have sounded a bit pessimistic, and I don't want to say that I'm against all the beautifully designed things. I'm not against applications, and I'm surely not against smartphones either, because after all, that's my job. But what I'm saying is, I do really think that technology will find answers, or will be an important part of the answer to a lot of our questions. But we have to get much, much better at asking this question, because that's one point where we're currently really lacking and falling behind. And here, I want to slowly move over to planet-centric design, because I really believe this is going to change a lot who we kind of include in that question, who we think about when we're raising these questions, and when we set out to find answers to answer this question. Now, building up on human-centered design, it's usually explained as consisting of these three circles. We have at the bottom right, I think, we have the technology circle. That's the question of how does it work, right? How do we build it? How do we make it functional? How can we make sure we can deliver the value we intended? That circle is, I'm not going to say it's easy, but that has been kind of in the minds of organizations and people for a long, long time. So it's a very classic one. Then we have the business circle. The business circle is concerned with how do we turn this into a sustainable model. I like to ask this question. I know a lot of people think business is the science of how to get rich, or as rich as possible. I have a bit of a different view. To me, business is the science of how to make your ideas sustainable, and sustainable in a way that they're not just ideas, everybody likes them, but nobody buys them, but really ideas that resonate and that can kind of pull themselves or put themselves over time. So that's the business circle. That is also quite prominent within organizations. So many of them are quite business-driven. Many of them in the let's get very rich sense, but that's another topic. And then human-centered design really said, all right, everybody, you're forgetting this third important circle, the human. And they said, we really have to focus on that one. We have to come from the human circle. We have to understand what value can we actually provide. What is the value that we need to provide to our customers? And so human-centered design really takes this approach from the human side, and then the technical and the business side will settle themselves. Now, I think it's a pretty good way. It works in a lot of contexts. But it's really important to understand that these three circles are embedded in a bigger one. And this circle is the planetary circle. Now, the planetary circle, someone once asked me, so is this just volcanoes, trees, and ants? And I was like, yes, and some other things too. So let me quickly explain. The planetary circle involves, for example, also systems, like the water system. It involves communities, like neighborhoods. All of us are part of a neighborhood, and we know how fragile this community is, and how we need to design for that community, for example. And it also includes resources. Resources, that's the more classic thing, like air, water, sand. I mean, after checking out the beach here yesterday, I wouldn't believe that sand is actually scarce, but we are running out of sand, and it's a problem. But that's the resources that are in there. And what's really important is this circle, it's not getting bigger. We cannot just pivot, we cannot swap it, we cannot grow it. It is kind of set, and we have to make the other three circles work within that circle. The climate youth, I think, sometimes says there is no planet B. There really isn't. We have to work with what we have here, and we have to find ways to do this much better. And here, I like to connect planet-centric design to another really fascinating concept called the donut economy, or donut economics, by Kate Raworth. She also thinks of planetary boundaries, or as she calls it, the ecological ceiling. That's just what we should not overshoot in order for the planet to be able to regenerate in a meaningful manner. But she connects it with a social aspect as well, which she calls the social foundation. And that means working inwards from the boundaries, we also have to make sure that we can establish a certain level or base of human condition, I'm going to call it. And so ideally, our economy works on the donut. We have to be somewhere on that donut, and we're fine. We make sure the planet is doing well, and we make sure us humans are doing well. And to make it a bit more tangible, I looked it up how it looks for Poland, for example. So you see Poland's doing pretty well at overshooting almost all the planetary boundaries. And yeah, I cannot say don't worry, but I want to say you're in good company. I think every European country, unfortunately, really overshoots these boundaries. You see Poland is falling a little short as well on the social foundation. I think it's partially employment and some life satisfaction, but overall it's doing really well on that sense. If you compare it to Sri Lanka, you see that Sri Lanka is not overshooting any planetary boundaries, but falling short on a lot of things when it comes to the social aspect. And this is just a great way to understand what is actually going on. But the important question is, so what are we going to do now? And I think planet-centric design really can help us to come up with a set of methodologies how we can now tackle each of these elements, of these pieces, and really come up with answers to solve them. And this is exactly what we're doing. So we're going from a human-centered view that is focused on the human and all the things we own and tries to make us as happy as possible, to a planet-centric view. And this planet-centric view, you see, still includes the human. It's not anti-human, but it is a more balanced view of all the things we have in our world. And it tries to take all of these elements into the design process and not just the one and single human. And by doing that, I would say planet-centric design even extends donut economics to a certain extent, because all the non-human actors are also not so much part of donut economics. And I think it would really profit from taking them up as well. So what it is doing, and yeah, what I want to say is that such a change or shift in perspective, it's nothing new. We've done that before. So in the industrialization age, we were very technology focused. We were focused on products. How do we build them? How does that work? We then moved into a more business-focused view, which was in the 80s and 90s, I would say, when everybody was obsessed with processes, with Toyota, with just optimization and supply chains and so on. Then in the 2000s, I mentioned it already, that was the high noon of the human-centered view or the human focus. And now, I believe, in the 20s, we should really move on to a planet-centered view or a planet perspective. And when you look at this visualization, you see it's not that we swap out one thing for the other. It's steps. So we build up onto each other. It's not that we forget about tech. It's not that we forget about business, and we're also not forgetting about the human. We're just extending and recalibrating the way we work. And why this is important, I want to show in this little graph. You see that this planet view really has a broader view that doesn't just focus on us humans. And I know that a lot of us really take care to not take plastic bags or not use cosmetics that have a lot of microplastics in there. But but I think that's really great that we do this, and it's very important to solve the big issue we're tackling. But when you look at this graph, you really have to look quite closely to see where the cosmetics part is, and it's at the very bottom. And at the top of this graph, and this is where all the microplastics are coming from, is tire abrasion. Tire abrasion, that's when you drive a car, or when you do donuts maybe, but that's when the particles come off your tires. And when I saw this, I was blown away, because I never would have thought. And it really shows you it's a systemic challenge we have. So if it comes from these tires, it's mobility is involved, the whole production is involved, the need to actually move from A to B is involved, and it's something we can no longer solve on a single human level. So all in all, planet-centric design moves from egoism, from this focus on one person, to ecosystems, to this broader view. And I want to stay with this sense of moving and break up planet-centric design in 4 movements. We have the 4 movements of from humans to planet, from humans to planet, from quantity to quality, from short to long term, and also from market fit to planet fit. And what we're going to do now is we're going to look at all these 4 movements in detail. I will give a few examples. I will give some methodologies, how we can tackle that, and I will also leave you with a question. All right, I guess let's start. From humans to planet. When you really think hard about how we do design and how our most popular design tools are put together, you will recognize or realize one thing. And it's that most of our tools, user research, user journeys, personas, they're all clearly human-focused. And this is a challenge, because all the non-human actors, they're not showing up in our design process. I don't think we're actively excluding them because we don't like them or we don't think they're important, but we have to be very clear that if they don't show up in our tools and our process, they will be forgotten eventually. So the first thing we have to do with human-centered design, with planet-centric design, is to make them visible and give them voice. And one interesting example is Lake Erie in the United States. Lake Erie is a pretty big lake, and it has recently been given a legal personality. What this means is this lake can sue you now. It can sue you if you pollute the lake. It's not just this lake that doesn't have any rights, doesn't have any agency to do anything. It is a legal personality, and it will come after you if you don't treat it right. And a similar thing is Mount Taranaki, for example, in New Zealand. That's a volcano. And I think more and more non-human legal personalities will show up because it really gives them agency to fight also for their own rights. Another example is this very cool project from a planet-centric designer from Jakob in Berlin. He did a university project where he was thinking of how he can make the river Spree. So for the ones who have never been to Berlin, that's the river that runs through the city. But how can he make the river Spree show more up in everybody's daily life? And his idea was to put some sensors, some stations with sensors in different parts of the river Spree, and then have these sensors communicate back to citizens. So you see the person holding an app, and that's where the river actually would tell, well, here I'm a little sour, here I'm a little warm, here I'm actually doing quite fine. And just by making this visible, it can become much more of a part of the people that live in Berlin. Now, we're still far, far away of ever being able to swim in that river because it has been heavily polluted back in the days. But maybe with this, we can create this awareness and can create the impetus so that something like this actually could happen in the future. Another interesting project that gives voice to non-human actors is Trees AI from Dark Matter Labs. Trees normally are a nuisance for city planners because in fall, they make all your streets really dirty, they break your pavements, they take away space. They need gardeners to take care of them, so it's can be kind of annoying. And maybe you need them because you have some quota from your government that you have to fulfill. But what Dark Matter Labs does with Trees AI is they really want to give a voice to trees as well, to kind of tell how a neighborhood is doing, how they are working with the air, how they're cleaning the air, and so on. And this is a really fascinating platform that is being built right now, and I believe throughout the next 3 years. And I'm very excited to see how this changes our relationship also with trees in cities, and to see them much more as a benefit and not just as a single element within a city. So how can we do that in our own projects? I'm sure many of you work in a design project or have an organization, a company themselves. And the very simple thing to do is just build a planetary persona. A persona is a classic design methodology. We usually do it, you can do it in marketing, you can do it for design. It's where you kind of distill everything you know into one sheet of paper. And what I took here is, there's many templates to do this, but I took the one from the value proposition canvas because it's very neat and easy. And I just took the Baltic Sea as well. And I was thinking about what are the gains, what are the pains, and what are the jobs to be done that this ocean or the sea actually has. And yes, it might seem silly at first. So when I work with our partners and clients, sometimes they go like, Samuel, that's a bit weird now what you're trying to do. But I'm telling you, it's very important to have that in view, to really know that they are part of your solution as well, and that you should not just exclude them. And that's why I want to encourage you to really think in the current project you have, for example, to think about what planetary stakeholders do we have there? And are there ways we can give them voice? Because it needs our work, right? A tree doesn't talk. A volcano might make a sound, but doesn't really get a message across so clearly. So we really have to go the extra mile and make them talk. A simple question, why do we only interview users and people? We could really also try to interview more non-human stakeholders or people that talk and represent these non-human stakeholders. Let's move on to the next movement, from quantity to quality. We are living in a system that kind of builds on this idea that a cake is always getting bigger and bigger. So it's this impetus for growth. It's this idea that we can constantly get more. And it works. I mean, we can print a lot of money still. It's not such a big issue. But what I'm really advocating here for is that let's stop thinking about how can we make the cake bigger. We should start thinking about how can we make it better. How can we make it tastier? Now, this metaphor might not be as strong, but it's really the point. It's not always more is better, but we really can make the experience of what we have in a single thing. That's what we should focus on. One example I have here is Morioka Shoten, which is a bookstore in Tokyo, in Ginza, I think. And what they do is they have one book on display, just one. And they really make sure that book is beautifully displayed. They know everything about the book, and people go there to just immerse themselves in that one book. And that's the brutal contrast to a normal bookstore that is like filled up under the roof with books and things. And I find it such a beautiful example of how we can rethink our relation to the things we might buy. And maybe this might not be scalable, but still, what I'm really encouraging everybody to do is to think about existing relations and how we can make them stronger instead of increasing them even further. A methodology that we can use is this one. And you might think now, oh, this slide is so full, I'm not going to look at it at all, but let me quickly walk you through it. It's quite simple, and it's also extremely effective once you got the hang of it. What we see here is also one of the designer's favorite tools, mapping or user journey mapping. And what we have on the left side is we have the steps. So the different steps we have to go throughout the service or with the product. We have the jobs to be done. So what do we want to achieve per step? And then it gets interesting. We have the planetary impact. For each step, we can say we have a positive or a negative impact, or we could have a positive or we could have a negative impact. Then the next line, we look at what are the opportunities. What if we do this? What if we do that? That's one of my favorite lines because I always try to think in how the world should be. And then as a last line, we have the SDGs. Now, some of you might know the SDGs. What I mean with that is the UN Sustainable Development Goals. I will show them in a second. And those are a really good way to measure also your relationships, not only in a quantitative way, but maybe in a more content or quality-driven way. But yeah, before we go there, there's one more thing I need to tell you, and that's the top of this journey. If we normally do a journey, we will only focus on the organizational part. So that's the blue one in the middle, because that's what we care about, right? As an organization, I don't really care so much what's happening after. If I'm an oil company, I'm technically quite sustainable because I'm not really burning the oil. Or at least that's what one of the big oil companies tried to say in a recent court ruling. Thank God they didn't get through with that. But yeah, we have the organizational part, and then we have the supply part. So we have to look at where is this all coming from? What do we use? What kind of materials? How do we get them? The topic here is supply chain. And then maybe you remember how I said design is not just about how we build something, but also how it's used. The usage part is also really important. What kind of behaviors are we inducing if we build this product? And how do we maybe even make it possible to reuse it again and close the circle? So a little story to the side. I tried to do this as a circle once, but I gave up because I realized it's getting too complicated. But technically, this should ideally work as a circle as well. And yeah, there you have it, a very, very powerful tool to really look at your existing processes or at a new product or a new service you're building again and really have a bigger picture. So really zooming out and adding small changes, recalibrating certain elements of a well-known design tool with a really, really huge impact. And I promise I'm going to talk a bit about the SDGs. So here they are. It's 17 goals. And they go in different areas. Some of them will be more on this ecological ceiling. Some will be at the social foundation, if you remember the donut economics visualization from before. But it's a very powerful way to say, in our project, we're going to focus on goal 4, I don't know, 10, and 13. And then you try to measure that in every step. And I promise you, it will really help you to work together with probably the senior management in your organization, with your sustainability department, because you give them a very legitimate way to assess also your work and to prove your work against. The question, therefore, is really think about which relationships do we already have, and how can we make them denser? How can we deepen these relationships? How can we make that experience better without using more? Let's move on to the third movement, from short to long term. Now, a lot of companies and organizations are kind of driven by their shareholders to work quarter to quarter. So you have to achieve all these goals. And if you have an idea or an initiative that goes beyond that, you're really struggling fighting against all the short-term ones, because usually they're less ambitious, they promise more revenue, and they're much less risky than one that goes for the long term. And I think here, the best example I can give is regulation. Might not be as sexy, but I think politics plays a really important part here. And I think planet-centric design should also be used in politics in order to fine-tune how we regulate things. I have the example here with the new European Bauhaus, which is part of the European Green Deal that Ursula von der Leyen is trying to proclaim, which basically wants business technology to work together through culture to really make Europe a powerhouse in the circular economy in the years to come. And I think even the design days here, the Gdynia Design Days, are part of this initiative. So I think all of this is really coming together and starting, and that's why I'm so happy to be here today and talk about that too, because I really hope we can start this conversation through this. A tool how you can try to tackle this short to long-term movement is the vision cone. I have to keep this short because the vision cone is by far my favorite tool, and everybody at Goodpatch mocks me about it. But I'm going to try to explain it really briefly. So what you have is, on the left side, you have the now. And then on the right side, you have the future. And how we normally work with futures is we look ahead, we maybe look back a bit, and we say, like, in the past, it happened like this, so this is most likely going to happen. So we extrapolate. Last year has told everybody that's not going to work, because suddenly a pandemic came around the corner, and everybody that was thinking this way was, had problems. So we need to think a lot bigger. We need to allow for some uncertainty. So we should think about this as well. What are plausible futures? So if we change a couple of things, what is plausible? And we can go even further. What is possible? Bill Gates, when he was doing all that work back in many years back, he was probably in the possible future. Everybody thought he's out of his mind, maybe, and over-dramatic, but he had a point. And so what you see here now, I have to add one more, the impossible futures, my favorite ones, that's the ones that really cannot happen, but I think we can learn a lot from them as well. But what you have here is a cone of futures, very, very important, futures in plural. So we have a lot of options that can happen, and we really need to decide which future is desirable. And we need to decide not which one is desirable for humans, because that's what we used to do. But we really should decide what is desirable for the planet. The question I want to leave you with is doing this exercise and thinking about what kind of futures do you have. Because the important thing is, as the cone opens, you have so many more opportunities, so much a bigger room of opportunity, which you don't have. If I ask Gdynia to go car-free next year, that's not going to work. If we talk about in 10 years, maybe there's a way to go there. And we can, with the cone, define a step-by-step way how to get there. Last movement, from market fit to planet fit. We are also living in a world where we have to find a certain fit. We have to make sure there is some way to make our ideas sustainable with a business case or something related to that. Now, I came across a really amazing example from a discounter chain in Germany. And it's called Penny. And what Penny used to do in two shops in Germany, they had two prices. The first price was the supermarket price, the normal supermarket price. And the second one was the true price. Now, what is the true price? The true price includes all the externalities, all the things we don't pay for, all the water that is made dirty, all the fertilizer that ends up in rivers and so on in high-yield agriculture. So all these things are priced in. And the fascinating thing was, if you would buy organic or bio, this was not the same, but it was closer together. But if you went to the real dumping products, sometimes I think the highest one is 5 or 6 times the price that you would pay in the supermarket. And I believe we need to find ways how we can price in the real price. Not just the price we pay as customers, but really the price we pay as inhabitants of this planet. One way to do this, to also give you a methodology, is the good old business model canvas. Many of you might know this. This model, it's very, very famous. And you can make it planet-centric by just adding this one more bar at the bottom. So don't just think about the cost and revenues of your organization, but also think about the cost and revenues or benefits for the planet. It's as simple as that. Make sure it's there. And it will be more visible in your design process as well. And again, the question I want to leave you with is, what is the real price of our products and services? Try to find that out. It's quite difficult to calculate, but it will really change how you do your business plans in the future and how you will yeah, kind of put it together to make it work and really define the return of investment. So these are the 4 movements. I know these were a lot of examples, a lot of methodologies, and lots of questions. But what I really wanted to show is that with planet-centric design, we're not changing everything completely, but we're doing very subtle and powerful changes to really retarget what we are looking at. And therefore, we can make a huge change starting quite fast. So I challenge you to try some of these tricks I shared in your work starting, yeah, it's Monday tomorrow, starting tomorrow, and see what you can do with that. To relate back maybe to the question I raised at the beginning, is planet-centric design the solution? If you know me, you know that I don't really think that there is the solution. I think planet-centric design is a methodology, a way of thinking, or a methodology that will expand the way we look at things and makes non-human stakeholders show up in our design process, that then will lead to solutions. The solutions can be something related to circular economics. It can be cradle to cradle. It can be so many solution-driven ones, but I don't think that planet-centric design should be seen as a solution, but it should be seen as a methodology. And in that, it is very, very powerful because we can apply it to so many things, and we can even keep it updated because it will be open to always find the best solution for the challenges we have. Thank you very much. That's all I have for today.
Thank you very much, Samuel. Take a seat. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I need some water
Of
as well.
course,
I realized there was
you
none
deserve
in the
it. Take your time. And, no to dobrze, to zadam teraz pytania, bo oczywiście na naszym czacie pojawiły się pytania do naszego gościa. Samuel odsapnie, napije się wody i pytanie, które dotyczy właściwie końcówki już tego wykładu. Kinga is asking, if business is more about short term, isn't it the big role of governments to establish rules to push businesses and people into more planet-centric design?
Yeah, I think governments do play an important role, especially when it's about giving a framework and maybe also minimizing uncertainty to a certain extent. There's many cases where we know there is a better solution, but current market dynamics just make it impossible for organizations to do or do the switch. So I can only agree to that question. I mean, as I said, there is some really great initiatives happening already. And what I would like to encourage even more is that these initiatives are also further evolved using methodologies like planet-centric design. Mm-hmm.
As human beings, we are both victims and guilty of this human-centric way of thinking. Isn't this a kind of Stockholm syndrome? You know, this is so hard to get out of it.
Yeah, I don't even know what to say about this. Yeah, we are both guilty and the victims of this. There's no way around it. I think a really important step is the awareness that we're actually in this moment. And then on one hand, there are all the small steps that we can take. But then on the other hand, and that's why I find planet-centric design so fascinating, is it doesn't just push everything to the individual, to you or me, but it really takes organizations in and tells them, hey, you have to work on your practices, you have to work on your routines, and you have to work on your processes, how you create and develop these products. Mm-hmm. And through that, I really believe we will, or I hope we will find a way to break out of this.
The third question, do you think, is it possible to that large global corporations will adopt the planet-centric strategy?
Of course.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I have this big vision that if you think about human-centered design, by now we take it somehow for granted. There's so many big corporations that say like, oh, we're fully customer-centered. It's their main strategy. But it wasn't really like that a couple of years back. And I really want to learn from how this very simple mechanic of how human-centered design matters worked to turn corporations around and apply it to planet-centric design. And my hope really is that in the future, companies don't say we're customer-centered, but that they fully state we are planet-centered. And I also think they will have to do that. Maybe I'm a bit leaning out the window too much with this, but I really think that in the 2000s, many organizations were disrupted by the digital transformation. And I think I start seeing some weak signals that show me that a lot of organizations will be disrupted by sustainability, just by the reason that they really will have to adapt. Just have to look at the fashion industry. You see strong signals there already. And yeah, I just invite everybody. It's not difficult to get started with it. It's difficult to really pull through with it and make the tough decisions. Because,
first step.
Yeah, first step.
Okay, and the last one, thinking about quality more than quantity. How to engage businesses, large businesses maybe, and make them more concentrate on poorer countries?
Yeah. So I hear like two parts in the question. One is how do we engage them to work more with qualitative metrics, and then also how can we move them to work with poorer countries. To answer the first part, it's kind of a paradox, right? Quality cannot really be measured if we really think of it as quality. So we have to find ways around it. One option I showed with the SDGs, I think that's one way. Another option really is to also go into a conversation within your organization or with these large corporates. What is their definition of quality? That's the first part of the question. How we can engage them to work with poorer countries. I'm not sure if I'm the right person to ask that directly, because I'm not so much involved in these processes. But I believe that just by applying this planetary perspective, organizations should, as a tendency, include all these other countries as well and start thinking about them. And then maybe one thing we could do, if we think about the methodology I showed with this planetary value journey, if we really go into the supply part, we could maybe start working there and get the organizations to really provide positive planetary impact at that stage as well.
Thank you for the inspiration.
Thank you very much for having me.